These cardiologists have reported that the damage done to heart muscle cells is through activated neutrophils. Preeclampsia in female is probably caused by oxidative stress caused by activated neutrophils. Alzheimer's and Parkinsonian patients have much higher levels of activated neutrophils producing oxidative stress. 8-fold increase in phagocyte superoxide anion production. Free radical is seen in patients with arthritis. Myeloperoxidase produced from neutrophils is a more sensitive marker of cardiovascular disease than is LDL. So here again and again, we see correlations between inflammation and cardiovascular disease. CRP and LDL together over time produces a perfectly linear correspondence with increased risks of cardiovascular events. One more thing happens, if this wasn't enough, because we have an imbalanced immune system, is that the material inside the neutrophils that have died and that have become necrotic, which I showed you pictures of a few moments ago, contains nuclear material. And too much of it, if there's a little bit of it, we're fighting a virus for a few days, okay, there's pus, dead white blood cells, and then you notice it goes away. You may not notice it if it's internal, but it goes away. You feel better. But if it's chronically happening, the system that makes it go away, which are other macrophages, can get overwhelmed, and we can become sensitized to our own genetic material. And that's been shown to be the cause of autoimmune disease. So the mystery of autoimmune disease might have a lot to do with the fact that we're drinking milk that we're allergic to every day, for example. And that's the conclusion. And we've talked about that. We then go on to produce more inflammatory chemicals, and then it shows us that it's not only that what we eat is important to us, but we also must concern ourselves with what we eats. And the economic trend now is to feed livestock, even the salmon, which we think is good and anti-inflammatory, corn and soy instead of normal feed. And this produces the development of a lot of omega-6 residues. And so we're getting a lot of these molecules in our body that break down into inflammatory chemicals. And that, triggered with the lower nutrients in our diet and the higher number of challenges to the immune system that we've discussed extensively, that trigger activation of the immune system, now has a ready feed of inflammatory chemicals stored away in the blood, in the cells, to perpetuate this state of inflammation chronically. And there's, I think, enough evidence to show that inflammation is the cause of premature aging. So that summarizes everything I wanted to speak about. There are a few more slides that relate to things that were covered, but I'm happy I got to cover everything. And I think I'll end here. So are there time for questions? Or is... Good. So if anyone has any question. Yes, ma'am.
Do you see any correlation between food intolerances and blood type?
But I haven't looked that extensively. I had contact with Bronner Herdberger, who runs the clinic up there, because we have a common friend, and he told me there's not really any scientific evidence for it. It's theoretical. I looked at it a little bit in my lab, and I lost interest in it. I've seen so many instances where people are reactive to weird things. I'm reactive to basil. Okay, it gives me bronchoconstriction. I wouldn't know it, and if I didn't have taken the test and then had the basil, I just would have not realized it. Food is too complex, and the diversity of humans is too complex that it can be boiled down to 3 or 4 types, in my opinion. And that's just what I haven't seen it. Yes, ma'am? My test. So I'm totally biased, I admit that, but I refrain from saying the name of my test, but it is the Alcat test, and that's the one I've been describing, because it's aimed at measuring the cells. And there are so many different factors that can activate the cells. And there are some factors that are thought to activate the cells that actually protect the cells, like IgG, which I briefly touched upon, that we get correlations with double-blinded oral challenges. We know we're seeing something real that actually has clinical relevance. Ma'am?
Have you seen something that is prevalent in almost all of the testing that you've done, like a sensitivity to gluten?
We see a lot of people reacting to gluten. We see a fair number of people reacting to casein. But one of the things is with casein is that it's one of the most adulterated foods because the cows are not fed grass. They're, and they're shot up with hormones and antibiotics. So I think raw whole milk, might be all right. It's the mainstay in India, the staple in India. But we do see those a lot. And then we see it all over the board. It could be anything. We test for herbs. We had a case of a physician who had a tumor that was growing, cut it off, it would grow back. He happened to test with us and tested herbs, and one of the herbs that he was taking every day for another condition came up strongly positive. He cut that out. The tumor went away. So herbs are powerful. All these foods are very complex. It could be anything. Yes?
How did your test react when you were already on medication, like enough irritation or rheumatoid arthritis?
Depends on the drug. It could have some effect, but if the symptoms are still manifesting, the cells are still producing the chemicals and free radicals. So if a person can avoid a drug that's specifically an anti-inflammatory drug, like even a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, for some days prior to testing, it's preferred. But if they can't, they can't obviously by definition because the symptoms are too strong, which means the cells are still reacting in spite of the drug. Okay, is there any? Good. Yes.
Is it your test? Does that mean for life you're allergic to that, or in the short term?
It can vary according to many factors. So if it's an enzyme deficiency wired into us, it may be with us for forever. If it's just something back that have had too much of it, and then we go and heal the gut, we may be able to tolerate it again in moderation after some periods of avoidance. Dynamic situation there.